Welcome to this explainer. We're jumping straight into something seriously mind-bending today, a theoretical framework that literally attempts to rewrite the entire fabric of reality. We're talking about the Q3 Nested Blackhole Cosmology framework. You can kind of think of this as a search for the unified geometric source code of everything we experience. It's proposing one single mechanism to explain space, mass, gravity, and cosmic evolution. So let's just dive right in and see exactly how deep this cosmic wormhole really goes.
Here is our cosmic flight plan for today. We'll start with the dimensional collapse illusion, move on to Q3 as the foundational unit, and then explore mass and the redshift boundary. After that, we'll see how gravity and dark energy might be unified, check out how this applies to testing cosmic voids, and finally, we'll see how it challenges the standard model.
All right, part 1, the dimensional collapse illusion. To kick things off, let's dramatically shrink our perspective way down and plunge right into the heart of a black hole. Now, what's genuinely fascinating about this model is how the classic flatland metaphor applies. We are 3D beings, right? Which means we can fundamentally only observe 2D surfaces. We just infer the third dimension through cues like shading or motion. Well, when we look at a black hole, this framework argues we are actually witnessing a dimensional collapse happening in stages. Our everyday 3D reality drops down to a 2D surface right at the event horizon. But the final stage? The theory claims it drops even further into a strictly 1D wormhole throat. So that terrifying singularity at the center of a black hole, you know, the spot where all of our current math just totally breaks down? This theory suggests it's not actually a point of infinite density at all. There's no infinity. It's simply a division by zero illusion. It's just a mathematical artifact of us stubbornly trying to use 3D math to describe a strictly one-dimensional object.
Moving on to part 2, Q3, the foundational unit.
So now that we've essentially reached the 1D floor of reality, let's look at the absolute minimum stable configuration of space itself. I really love this quote from the text. There is no such thing as nothing. Q3 is the ground state of reality. Under this geometric framework, universes absolutely do not just pop into existence out of pure nothingness. Instead, they are the inevitable, unavoidable result of the underlying geometry of wormholes. In this model, true emptiness is mathematically impossible.
Okay, so what actually is Q3? That's the crucial question. It is definitely not a single point or a static pixel on a cosmic screen. It's a relationship. It absolutely requires exactly 3 components to exist: 2 wormhole ends, the absolute minimum distance required to keep them apart, and the minimum energy needed to maintain that separation. And here's the wild part. When these incredibly tiny Q3 units form and annihilate continuously down at the microscopic scale, they produce what standard physics refers to as quantum foam. So the apparent randomness of quantum fluctuations, it's really just this Q3 lattice constantly cycling in the background.
Which brings us to part 3, mass and the redshift boundary.
Let's bounce back up from that 1D floor for a second and see how things like physical mass actually come into existence here. This is where the framework gets incredibly visual. Picture this. Matter falls into a black hole, right? It collapses into these 1D frequency pulses. These pulses shoot through the wormhole, and then they exit out into a newly birthed child universe. But as they exit, they slam into the naturally flat 2D Higgs field of that new universe. What happens next depends entirely on the length of the pulse. Short, high-frequency pulses pass right through almost instantly. They barely crumple, they experience basically zero drag, and they become massless photons. But long, low-frequency pulses, they can't make it through cleanly. They literally fold geometrically. They crumple. And that crumpling is what creates amplitude, making them kind of sticky against the Higgs lattice. That geometrical resistance, that drag, is exactly what we experience as rest mass. And this brilliantly illustrates one of the most mind-bending claims of the whole theory. 3D space itself is just an emergent property. It's forced into existence simply because these crumpled, massive pulses are pushing the naturally flat 2D Higgs field outward.
And keep in mind, this isn't just philosophical poetry. When you actually model this out computationally, the math strictly enforces these physical limits. The logic is tightly constrained. If the length between nodes drops below that minimum Q3 distance we talked about, the simulation engine immediately ramps up the curvature and the energy. It actively enforces the tension of the Higgs sheet to prevent reality from literally overlapping itself. All right, part 4, gravity and dark energy unified. Let's zoom out to the macro scale now. How does this massive, crumpled geometry actually interact with the whole universe? Well, standard physics treats gravity and dark energy as 2 massive, totally separate mysteries. But Q3? Q3 says they are literally the exact same mechanism. The 2D Higgs field has one fundamental drive.
It desperately wants to remain perfectly flat. So gravity is simply the field's resistance to being warped. It's pushing back against those crumpled massive particles, trying to straighten them out. It is fundamentally a push, not a pull. Conversely, think about what happens in a cosmic void, where there's almost no mass. The Higgs field out there is under minimal stress, right? So it effortlessly pushes outward to remain flat, which expands space incredibly fast. It's literally one mechanism with two faces. Gravity is the field fighting mass. Dark energy is the field relaxing in an empty room.
Let's look at part 5, testing the cosmic voids.
Because let's be real, a theory is just a fun sci-fi story unless it connects back to actual, observable data. The sources outline some very specific, testable predictions that ground this reality. First, since dark energy is just relaxed Higgs tension, expansion absolutely shouldn't be uniform. We should actively observe cosmic voids expanding way faster than dense filaments. Second, in a brand new universe, massive energy influxes would heavily warp the fresh Higgs field. This creates what are called dark matter stars that collapse almost instantly into supermassive black holes. And you know what? This perfectly aligns with the James Webb Space Telescope's recent highly anomalous findings of giant black holes existing way too early in our universe's history. Third, because our universe was theoretically born from a rotating parent black hole, we inherently inherited that rotation, which perfectly explains the mysterious CMB dipole. And fourth, the model predicts a built-in 60-40 directional bias for how galaxies rotate across the entire cosmos.
Finally, part 6, challenging the Standard Model. What happens when this geometric source code confronts established physics? Every robust scientific framework must have a falsification condition. We have to ask the hard question. What single discovery would prove this entire Q3 theory absolutely wrong?
To understand what would break the theory, you have to look at how Q3 handles gravity mathematically. It organically triggers a black hole collapse whenever the required curvature and energy exceed a critical bound. It generates gravitational collapse right out of the tension of the Higgs sheet itself, entirely sidestepping those infinite mathematical singularities that constantly plague standard general relativity. Gravity just emerges directly from the sheet.
So, the ultimate falsification condition? The graviton. The Standard Model has been desperately hunting for the graviton, a distinct particle that carries the force of gravity, for decades now. If scientists ever definitively discover a graviton, this entire Q3 framework collapses. It's done. Because in this model, gravity is purely the emergent tension of the Higgs field pushing against crumpled geometry. There's absolutely no room and literally no need for a separate gravity-carrying particle.
We've traveled all the way from the mathematical illusion of a singularity down to the Q3 quantum floor and zoomed right back out to the expansion of cosmic voids. The Q3 Nested Blackhole Cosmology asks us to strip away basically all of our preconceptions. It's an incredibly fascinating reinterpretation of the exact same data we already have, and it leaves us with this final, highly provocative thought. If 3D space itself is truly just an emergent illusion caused by crumpled, one-dimensional pulses hitting a two-dimensional boundary, what else are we fundamentally misperceiving in the cosmos? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the structure of everything.